Hi, this is Johns Hopkins, and we're back again with another 5-Minute Histories video here from our living room in Bolton Hill. And today I think we're going to head over to Patterson Park, but we're not going to go to the pagoda or the pond or the White House or the fountain. What we're going to do is go to the battlefield. That's right, the hillside that we all sled down when we were kids, or have kids who sled down there now, is actually a battlefield from the War of 1812. We think of Fort McHenry as a War of 1812 site, but just as important for the defense of Baltimore was Patterson Park, then called Hampstead Hill. Back in 1814, the British had just bombed and set fire to Washington, D.C. The famous incident of Dolly Madison, President Madison's wife, running out the back door of the White House carrying the portrait of George Washington with her as the British were coming in to burn the White House down. She escaped. I think maybe luckily for her, the British got a little waylaid by going down into the wine cellar of the White House first before they actually set it on fire. But that incident happened, and after Washington, D.C. was burned, Baltimore knew that we were next. The British were going to come for us, mostly because we were the chief producers of the clipper ship, which was smaller than the British ships and could sail into the wind tighter, so it was literally running circles around them. As one incident, kind of funny in retrospect, ship's captain out of Fells Point named Thomas Boyle decided that since the British had blockaded the Chesapeake Bay, down at the mouth of the bay, he would go and do the same to them. So in his clipper ship, he shot through the blockade, crossed over the Atlantic, and started sailing up and down the English Channel. He had one of his crew rowed ashore and post a note on a door, I think, I don't know which door it was, but post a note on a door in London that read, and I'll paraphrase a little bit, something like, hear ye, you British, you're blockading the Chesapeake Bay, so I, Captain Boyle, am hereby blockading the British Isles. And that was, of course, ridiculous. He was one tiny little ship, but I think it had the intended effect of making the British hopping mad. If you want to know how big the ship was that Thomas Boyle sailed, the Chasseur, it was the model for today's Pride of Baltimore. So go take a look at that and you'll know what Thomas Boyle was sailing. So the British come to Baltimore, but we're prepared. For the month between when Washington was burned, we had been working day and night, and virtually every resident of Baltimore, young and old, black and white, came together to fortify the city. In addition to Fort McHenry, we dug a mile-long trench from basically the harbor up to where Hopkins Hospital is today, right through Patterson Park. We know this because in 2014, on the bicentennial, we at Baltimore Heritage, in partnership with the Friends of Patterson Park, did an archaeology dig there and found the trench. Also found really cool things like a bullet from a musket in the War of 1812. But we verified where the trench was. And the trench was manned not by a ragtag group of citizens, but by trained militia from around Maryland and Pennsylvania. So the British, as they were bombing Fort McHenry, and they were doing that because not they wanted to bomb Fort McHenry, they wanted to sail their ships into the inner harbor because their cannons were on their ships. And so if they could get their ships in the inner harbor, they could turn them so that they could bomb downtown Baltimore. So as they were bombing Fort McHenry, they landed at North Point and marched towards Baltimore. This was the ground assault. But along the way, we basically did early guerrilla warfare, and with snipers placed at various points along the road, we picked off British soldiers, including their commander, who lay bleeding what would be to death in a ditch along the way. So when the British got to Patterson Park, right about where the Pulaski Monument is, down the hill from where the monument is, it was pouring rain. They found a mile-long, 6-foot-deep trench staffed with or manned with all sorts of militia and cannons that we had taken off of boats, Baltimore boats, before we sank them in the inner harbor. We sank boats with their masts protruding to try to help, another effort to keep the British out of the harbor, British ships out of the harbor. So the second in command took a look up this hill with this well-manned garrison along a mile-long stretch He tried to go around Patterson Park up towards Hopkins Hospital. That was still well manned with cannons. And eventually decided that rather than charge up this hill and maybe lose entirely, but certainly lose a lot of troops, that he would go home. So they went back, marched back, got on the boat, and left for Great Britain with a note to the king basically saying Baltimore was too well prepared for us. Final note, as we were doing this bicentennial of the War of 1812, the Friends of Patterson Park had the cannons. If you know the pagoda, you'll see a line of cannons just to the left, restored, and they are pretty authentic. We can't trace them exactly back to the ones that were there in 1814, but they're exactly the same type that would have been. And the cannon restorer, this expert, came in and got really excited about one small cannon. They were pretty much all of the cannons are British. That's not surprising because in 1814 we were just a generation away from being British. We had only won the Revolutionary War recently. But there was one that did not have the royal seal on it. I guess all cannons made in England have the seal of the king, whichever king it is. And this one didn't have that seal on it. And he got very excited because that's pretty rare. And it didn't have the seal because it was made during the interregnum, the time when England had no crown, when Oliver Cromwell was in charge. So if you go take a look at one small cannon out there, and you can get as excited as our cannon restorer did. But next time you're bringing friends from out of town to the park, tell them this story, and hopefully they'll be a little bit amazed as well. Thanks so much. We'll see you tomorrow.